The slap echoed under fluorescent lights, sharp, sudden, and loud enough to freeze every person in that room. A black woman stood there alone in a plain gray coat, her cheek turning red as the officer stepped back like it was nothing. No one moved, not the clerk behind the glass, not the officers nearby, not the people sitting just feet away. Eyes dropped. Silence spread. She didn't raise her voice, didn't argue, didn't even touch her face for more than a second. Instead, she straightened her posture and quietly adjusted a small pin on her coat. Barely noticeable, but placed with intention. "I have a right to be here," she said, calm as if none of it had just happened. That's when the room shifted, just a little, because she wasn't afraid, and that made him angrier. He thought he had just put a nobody in her place. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in less than 24 hours, that same woman would walk back through those doors, and every second of this moment would come back to haunt him. And by then, there would be nowhere left to hide. The lights in the Ridgeline precinct never really turned off. Even at dawn, they hummed overhead, flickering faintly like they were tired of watching the same things happen over and over again. The lobby smelled like burnt coffee and old paper. A plastic chair creaked as someone shifted their weight, waiting for help that always seemed just a little too far away. At 7:42 a.m., the front doors opened with a dull, metallic sound. Angela Brooks stepped inside quietly, as if she didn't want to disturb anything. Her coat was plain, a soft gray that blended into the walls, no badge, no uniform, no sign that she belonged to the world behind the locked doors beyond the front desk. She paused just long enough to take in the room. The scuffed linoleum floor, the cracked chairs, the clerk behind the glass window barely looking up, a woman at the far end clutching her purse like it might disappear if she blinked. Everything exactly where it had been for years. Angela moved forward. She didn't rush, didn't hesitate either. Just walked with a steady, quiet confidence that didn't demand attention, but didn't shrink from it. She was halfway to the counter when the side door opened. Two officers stepped in from the staff entrance, cold air following them in. One of them laughed about something under his breath. The other, taller, broader, carrying his authority like it belonged to him, stopped mid-step when he saw her. Officer Ryan Cole. He didn't ask who she was, didn't ask why she was there. He just looked at her, eyes narrowing slightly, like he'd already made up his mind. "Hey," he said sharply, his voice cutting through the low hum of the room. "You lost?" Angela turned toward him, calm, measured. "I have a meeting here," she said. It was a simple sentence, clear, respectful, but something about the way she said it, steady, without apology, shifted the air. Ryan let out a short laugh, glancing at his partner like he'd just heard a joke. "A meeting," he repeated. "Yeah, I don't think so." A couple of people in the lobby looked up. Not fully, just enough to see where the tension was coming from. Angela didn't move. "I have every right to be here," she said. Still calm, still controlled. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. Ryan stepped closer, his boots echoing against the tile. He didn't stop until he was just a little too close, the kind of distance meant to push someone back without touching them. "You need to turn around," he said, his voice lower now, heavier, "and walk out that door." Angela held his gaze, didn't flinch. Behind the glass, the clerk shifted uncomfortably. She'd seen this kind of moment before, the way it built, the way it ended. On the bench, the woman with the purse slowly reached into her bag, her fingers wrapped around her phone. She didn't lift it, didn't make it obvious. She just placed it on her lap, screen angled toward the room. Something told her not to look away. Angela's hand moved slightly, not in defense, not in fear, but to adjust the small pin on the edge of her coat. It caught the light for a second. Simple, easy to miss. But her eyes never left Ryan's badge. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'm not causing any trouble." That was the moment. The exact moment things crossed a line no one in that room would forget, even if they tried. Ryan's expression hardened. Something in him didn't like being spoken to that way. Not loudly, not aggressively, just not submissively. His hand came up, not fast, not wild, but deliberate. The sound that followed cracked through the lobby like something breaking. Sharp, final. Angela's head turned slightly with the impact. Just a fraction. Her hand rose to her cheek, not in panic, but in instinct. The skin there already warming under her fingers. Silence swallowed the room. No one moved. Not the clerk, not the woman on the bench, not the officer standing right beside Ryan. Even the lights seemed to hum a little quieter. Angela stood there for a second, then two, then three. She didn't shout, didn't cry, didn't demand anything. She just straightened her posture slowly, her hand lowering from her face, her breathing even, controlled. And then she looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, but with something far more unsettling. Recognition. Ryan frowned slightly, like something about that look didn't sit right. "Get out," he said, louder now, trying to fill the silence he'd created. Angela didn't respond. She turned, walked toward the door, each step steady, measured, like she was leaving on her own terms, not being pushed out of a place she didn't belong. No one stopped her. No one said a word. The door opened again with that same dull, metallic sound. Cold morning air rushed in, and then she was gone. Inside, Ryan exhaled, shaking his head like he'd just dealt with a minor inconvenience. "People," he muttered under his breath. Behind him, the woman on the bench stared down at her phone. The screen was still recording, and on it, clear as day, was everything. The words, the movement, the moment his hand connected. She didn't stop the video. Not yet, because something told her this wasn't over, not even close. And somewhere out in the parking lot, sitting behind the wheel of a quiet gray sedan, Angela Brooks stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The mark on her cheek was already forming. She didn't touch it again. Instead, she reached for her phone and began to write. The car engine wasn't running, but the dashboard lights glowed faintly in the dim morning gray. Outside, the wind dragged loose trash across the asphalt, the soft scrape echoing in the empty parking lot like something restless that refused to settle. Angela Brooks didn't rush. Her fingers moved steadily across the screen, typing with a precision that felt practiced, almost automatic. Time, 7:44 a.m. Location, Ridgeline Precinct Lobby. Officer name, Cole. Badge number. She paused for less than a second, recalling it clearly, then entered it without hesitation. She wrote down everything, the tone of his voice, the distance between them, the exact phrasing he used, the angle of his hand, the way the room had gone silent. There was no emotion in her notes, no anger, no commentary, just facts. The kind of facts that didn't change when people tried to rewrite them later. She finished the entry, saved it, and opened her camera. The screen reflected her face back at her, calm, composed, but the mark on her cheek had deepened, a faint red imprint rising beneath her skin. Angela tilted her head slightly, capturing the image from two angles, then a third, each photo time-stamped. She lowered the phone. For a moment, she just sat there, her hands resting on the steering wheel. Her breathing was steady, too steady. Inside the precinct, everything had happened fast. Too fast for most people to process. But Angela didn't process moments the way most people did. She cataloged them, broke them down, stored them away. Because she'd learned a long time ago that memory alone wasn't enough. Memory could be questioned. Facts couldn't. A knock echoed faintly from somewhere across the lot. A car door slamming shut. Angela glanced up. A man in a janitor's uniform was crossing the pavement, head down, moving toward the back entrance of the building. He didn't look at her. Nobody had. Not really. She turned her gaze back to the phone and scrolled through what she'd written. Then she opened a new note. Witnesses. She listed them carefully. Front desk clerk, female, mid-50s. Civilian, older woman. Seated bench, recording device visible. Second officer, male, early 20s, remained silent. Angela paused. The second officer. She could still see the hesitation in his face, the flicker of something, uncertainty maybe, or conscience. It hadn't lasted. It never did in places like that. She closed her eyes briefly, leaning her head back against the seat. And just for a second, the present slipped, replaced by something older, a different room, smaller, dimmer, the smell of cheap detergent and worn carpet. She was 10 years old, standing beside her mother at a grocery store counter. A man behind the register watching them too closely, his hand hovering near the phone like he expected trouble before it even arrived. "Are you going to pay for that?" he'd asked, his voice tight, suspicious. Her mother had smiled, calm, dignified, the same way Angela had stood in that lobby just minutes ago. "We always do," her mother had said. Angela remembered the way her mother's hand had rested lightly on her shoulder. Not gripping, not tense, just there, steady, a quiet kind of strength. Angela opened her eyes again. The memory faded, but the feeling didn't. She reached down and adjusted the small pin on her coat. It was simple, metal, understated, but it sat perfectly straight now, aligned with the seam. A habit. Details mattered. Across the lot, the janitor disappeared through the side door. The building loomed in front of her, unchanged, like nothing had happened inside it. Because officially, nothing had. Not yet. Angela picked up her phone again and scrolled through her contacts. She hovered over one name, her thumb resting just above the screen. Then she lowered her hand. Not yet. Timing mattered too. Instead, she opened a different app and typed in a short message. No greeting, no explanation, just a line. Arrival complete. She hit send. The message disappeared instantly, absorbed into a system that didn't need confirmation. Angela set the phone down on the passenger seat and stared straight ahead. Inside that building, Ryan Cole was probably already laughing about what had happened, replaying it for anyone who would listen, turning it into a story where he was in control. People like him always did, because as far as he knew, nothing had changed. He still owned that space, still decided who belonged and who didn't, still believed the moment ended when she walked out the door. Angela's lips pressed together slightly, not in anger, in recognition. She'd seen that kind of certainty before, the kind that came from years of never being challenged, never being held accountable. It made people careless, predictable. She reached for the ignition and started the engine. The car came to life with a low hum, vibrating faintly beneath her hands. For a second, she didn't move, just watched the entrance to the precinct through the windshield. People were coming in now. Officers in uniform, coffee cups in hand, conversations easy and unguarded. None of them knew what had just happened. Or maybe they did, and chose not to see it. Angela shifted the car into reverse. As she backed out of the parking space, her gaze lingered on the glass doors, the same doors she'd walked through minutes earlier, the same doors she'd been pushed out of. They looked smaller now, less imposing, like something temporary. She pulled out of the lot slowly, merging onto the street as the city around her began to wake. Traffic lights flickered from red to green. A bus rumbled past, its windows fogged from the inside. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed, then faded. Life moving forward, unaware. Angela drove in silence, her mind already several steps ahead of where she was. Inside the precinct, a story was being told. But outside of it, another one had just begun. And this one wouldn't end the way they expected. Inside the precinct, the morning rolled forward like nothing had happened. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the ceiling. Coffee brewed somewhere in the back, the bitter smell drifting through the hallway. A printer coughed out reports no one would read carefully enough. Boots moved across tile, radios crackled. Routine settled back into place, neat and familiar, like the air had swallowed the moment whole. Ryan Cole leaned against the edge of the front desk, sipping from a paper cup that had already gone lukewarm. His partner, a younger officer named Jensen, stood beside him, scrolling through his phone. "You see that?" Ryan said, shaking his head with a smirk. "Walks in like she owns the place." Jensen let out a short laugh, not fully committed. "Yeah, I mean, she didn't even have credentials." Ryan shrugged, like that explained everything. "People like that don't need credentials," he said. "They just assume." Behind the glass, Carol, the front desk clerk, kept her eyes on her computer screen. But she wasn't reading anything. The cursor blinked on an empty form. She had seen the whole thing, every second of it. And now she was doing what she always did. Nothing. On the far bench, the older woman slowly slipped her phone back into her purse. Her hands trembled just slightly, but her face stayed still. She didn't look at Ryan, didn't look at anyone. She just stood up quietly, walked to the door, left. No one stopped her. No one asked what she had seen. The door shut behind her with a soft click. Ryan turned, tossing his empty cup into a trash can without looking. It bounced off the rim and fell to the floor. He didn't bother picking it up. "Let's go," he said to Jensen. "Briefing's in 10. They walked toward the bullpen, their voices fading into the background noise of the building. Carol exhaled slowly once they were gone. She leaned back in her chair, pressing her fingers lightly against her temples. 9 years. 9 years sitting behind that glass. She had seen arguments, shouting, people angry, scared, desperate. But this had been different. There had been something in the way the woman held herself. Not defiant, not loud, just steady. Carol stared at the door for a moment longer, then turned back to her screen. And still, she didn't type a single word. Outside, the cold had settled deeper into the morning. Angela's car was long gone now, replaced by a line of vehicles pulling in one after another. Officers arriving late, civilians coming to file reports. Life stacking on top of itself, layer by layer, covering what had just happened, like fresh snow over something buried underneath. But not everything stayed buried. Across the street, the older woman, Denise Harper, sat inside a small bus shelter. The plastic walls rattled softly every time the wind passed through. She pulled her coat tighter around her and looked down at her phone again. Her thumb hovered over the video file. She pressed play. The screen filled with the image of the lobby. Grainy, slightly tilted, but clear enough. She watched the moment unfold again. The words, the tension, the movement, and then the sound. That sharp crack. Denise flinched, even though she knew it was coming. She paused the video. Her reflection stared back at her from the screen. Older eyes, tired, but not empty. I should have said something, she murmured to herself. But she hadn't. None of them had. Her grip tightened around the phone. Across the street, the precinct stood tall and unchanged, its windows reflecting the pale gray sky. Denise looked at it for a long time, then back at the screen. Her thumb moved again, this time not to play the video, but to duplicate it. Save it. Back it up. Something told her that one copy wouldn't be enough. Back inside the building, the briefing room filled with the low murmur of voices. Chairs scraped against the floor. Papers shuffled. Someone laughed too loudly at something that wasn't that funny. Ryan dropped into a seat near the center, stretching his legs out in front of him like he owned the space. Jensen sat beside him, quieter now. You ever think, Jensen said under his breath, that maybe we go a little too far sometimes? Ryan didn't look at him. No, he said simply. Jensen hesitated. I'm just saying, that woman. She was in the wrong place, Ryan cut in. End of story. Jensen nodded, but it wasn't a real agreement. Not quite. At the back of the room, Tanya Reed stood with her arms crossed, watching the two of them. Her expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. She had seen the way Angela looked at Ryan. Not scared, not angry. Something else. Something Tanya couldn't quite name. And that unsettled her more than anything else that had happened. Because people who looked like that, they didn't just walk away, they came back. The captain's office down the hall sat empty, the blinds half closed, dust catching in the thin lines of light that slipped through. The chair behind the desk hadn't been used in weeks. Files sat stacked in neat piles, waiting for someone to take control of them, waiting for someone to decide what mattered, what counted, what stayed hidden, and what didn't. The building held its breath without knowing it. Somewhere beyond its walls, a decision had already been made. But inside, no one felt it yet. No one saw it coming. And that was the most dangerous part of all. The briefing room emptied slowly, like a tide pulling back from shore. Conversations drifted into the hallway, low and scattered, bouncing off the concrete walls. Someone complained about overtime. Another joked about paperwork piling up. Life inside the precinct resumed its usual rhythm, steady and unbothered. Like nothing had shifted. Ryan Cole pushed through the double doors into the break room, grabbing a fresh cup of coffee from the burner that had been sitting too long. The smell was sharp, bitter, but he didn't seem to notice. He leaned against the counter, stirring sugar into it without looking. You should have seen her face, he said, loud enough for the room to hear. Walked in like she had somewhere important to be. A couple of officers chuckled. One of them shook his head. Man, you don't waste time, do you? Ryan smirked, taking a sip. Why would I? Place runs smoother when people know their boundaries. Jensen stood off to the side, arms crossed, not laughing this time. He stared down into his own cup like he might find something in it that made more sense than the conversation around him. She said she had a meeting, Jensen muttered. Ryan didn't even turn toward him. Yeah, he said, and I say I've got a yacht waiting for me out back. More laughter. It wasn't loud, not explosive, just easy, comfortable, the kind of laughter that came from a room where nobody expected to be challenged. Across the room, Tanya Reed sat at the small table near the vending machine, her fingers wrapped tightly around a bottle of water she hadn't opened. Her jaw was set, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular. But she was listening. She always listened. Ryan's voice carried through the room, casual and careless. People walk in here thinking they can just be anything, he continued, like the rules don't apply to them. Tanya's grip tightened. She had heard that tone before. Different words, same meaning. She glanced up briefly, her eyes meeting Jensen's for just a second. There was something in his expression, uncertainty, maybe regret, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. He looked away. Of course he did. Tanya lowered her gaze again, unscrewing the cap on her bottle slowly. The plastic crackled under her fingers. 6 years. 6 years in this building. 6 years of watching things happen and telling herself it wasn't her place to step in. 6 years of choosing silence because silence felt safer. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the vending machine glass. Uniform pressed, badge polished, everything in its proper place, except the feeling sitting in her chest. That hadn't been there before. Ryan set his cup down with a soft thud. Anyway, he said, pushing himself off the counter. Let's get back to work. Some of us actually do it. The room shifted. Chairs scraped. Conversations moved on. Just like that. Like the moment in the lobby had already been filed away and forgotten. Tanya stayed seated, the water bottle still unopened in her hands. She could still see the woman's face. Not the mark on her cheek, not the moment of impact, but the look afterward. Calm, too calm. That wasn't how people reacted. Not here, not in that situation. Most people raised their voices, got angry, tried to explain themselves. That woman hadn't. She had stood there like she already knew something no one else did. Tanya inhaled slowly, then stood up. She walked past Ryan without saying a word, heading toward the hallway. Her boots echoed softly with each step, the sound swallowed by the building's constant hum. As she passed the front desk, she caught Carol's eye through the glass. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Carol looked down again, back to the blank screen. Tanya kept walking. Out through the side door, the cold air hit her immediately, sharp and clean compared to the stale warmth inside. She stood there for a second, letting it settle over her. Across the street, the bus shelter sat half empty now. The older woman was still there. Denise Harper. Tanya recognized her. She came in sometimes, small complaints, neighborhood issues. Nothing serious. But today, something about her felt different. Denise was staring down at her phone, her thumb moving across the screen with purpose. Not scrolling, not texting, saving something. Tanya's eyes narrowed slightly. A feeling settled in her gut. The same one she'd felt in the briefing room. The same one she couldn't quite name. Change. She stepped down off the curb, crossing the street slowly. Cars passed behind her, tires hissing against damp pavement. Denise looked up as Tanya approached. Their eyes met. Neither of them smiled. "You okay?" Tanya asked quietly. Denise hesitated. Then she nodded once. "I saw what happened," she said. Tanya glanced back toward the precinct building. Its windows reflected nothing. "I did too," Tanya replied. A beat passed between them. Denise held up her phone just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to see. "I recorded it," she said. The words hung in the air. Tanya didn't react immediately. Didn't reach for the phone. She just stood there processing. Because that changed things. Not everything, but enough. "You kept it?" Tanya asked. Denise's grip tightened around the device. "I made copies," she said. "I don't know why. Just felt like I should." Tanya nodded slowly. That feeling again. Stronger now. Like a crack forming beneath something solid. "You might want to hold on to that," Tanya said. Denise studied her for a moment. "Do you think anyone's going to care?" she asked. Tanya looked back at the precinct, at the doors, at the place where everything always stayed the same. "I don't know," she admitted. Then quieter. "But I think someone will." Denise didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Tanya stepped back, turning toward the building again. The cold followed her as she walked. Inside, the noise hadn't changed. The laughter, the conversations, the same patterns repeating themselves over and over again. But Tanya felt it now, clear as the air outside. Something had shifted, and for the first time in 6 years, she wasn't sure silence was going to hold it together. Not this time. The door closed behind Tanya with a soft thud, cutting off the noise of the precinct like a switch flipped. Inside, the voices blurred into something distant, meaningless. Outside, the cold had teeth. She stood there for a moment longer, her breath visible in the air, watching the street like she expected something to happen right in front of her. But nothing did. Cars passed. A delivery truck rumbled by. A siren echoed faintly somewhere far off. Life kept moving. It always did. Tanya exhaled slowly and turned back toward the building, her boots carrying her across the pavement. The weight in her chest hadn't lifted. If anything, it had settled deeper, pressing against something she had ignored for years. Inside, everything looked the same. Too clean, too normal, like the building itself had learned how to pretend. She walked past the front desk again. Carol didn't look up this time. Her fingers moved across the keyboard now, finally typing, but the screen still showed nothing meaningful. Just empty forms, half-filled lines, placeholders where something should have been recorded, but wasn't. Tanya didn't stop. She pushed through the hallway, past the bulletin board with outdated notices, past the captain's office that had stayed empty too long. The door was slightly open now, sunlight cutting through the blinds in narrow strips across the desk. Dust floated in those beams, unbothered, unnoticed, waiting. Tanya paused just for a second, glancing inside, then kept walking. The rest of her shift passed like a shadow. Calls came in, reports were filed. People moved from one place to another, doing what they always did. But underneath it all, something had shifted. Quiet, subtle, but impossible to ignore once you felt it. Tanya kept seeing Angela's face. That calm, that stillness, that look. It stayed with her longer than it should have. Because people who looked like that, they didn't just disappear. Across town, Angela Brooks pulled into a narrow parking lot behind a modest apartment building. The bricks were faded, the paint chipped near the stairwell, and a flickering light buzzed above the entrance, even though the sun had fully risen. She turned off the engine. The silence inside the car settled around her again, thicker this time. For a moment, she didn't move. Just sat there, hands resting lightly on the wheel, her gaze fixed on nothing in particular. Then she reached over, picking up her phone. The screen lit up. No missed calls, no messages. Just the note she had written earlier. Angela read it again, slowly, her eyes scanning each line like she was memorizing it all over again. Not because she needed to, but because she believed in precision. Details mattered. They always had. She locked the phone and stepped out of the car. The cold hit her again, sharper now that she'd been sitting still. She pulled her coat tighter around herself, adjusting the small pin at the collar without thinking. It caught the light again. Subtle, unassuming, but placed exactly where it needed to be. Angela climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, her footsteps quiet against the worn metal. The hallway smelled faintly of cleaning solution and something older underneath it. Time, maybe. She unlocked her door and stepped inside. The apartment was simple, clean, organized. A small kitchen with a single window, a couch near the far wall, a wooden table with neatly stacked papers, a laptop closed on top. Everything in its place. Everything intentional. Angela set her keys down and removed her coat, hanging it carefully by the door. The pin remained attached, untouched. She moved to the kitchen, filling a glass with water from the sink. The faucet creaked as she turned it, the sound echoing in the quiet room. She took a slow sip, then another. Her reflection stared back at her from the window above the sink. The mark on her cheek had darkened slightly. Not dramatic, not obvious to someone who wasn't looking. But it was there. Angela studied it for a moment. Not with anger, not with hurt, just acknowledgement. Then she turned away. She walked to the table and opened her laptop. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale glow across her face. She typed in a password without hesitation. A secure portal loaded. Minimal design. Clean interface. Professional. Angela navigated through it quickly, her movements efficient, practiced. She uploaded the notes, the photos, the timestamps, every detail, everything documented, everything preserved. She paused only once, hovering over the final submission button. Then she clicked it. The file disappeared into the system, gone from her hands, but not from the record. Angela leaned back in the chair slightly, her fingers resting on the edge of the table. For a moment, the room was completely still. Then her phone buzzed. She didn't rush to pick it up. When she did, she glanced at the screen. A single message. No name attached. Just a number. Understood. That was it. Angela set the phone down again. No questions, no follow-up. It didn't need one. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the street below. People moved along the sidewalk, bundled against the cold, carrying groceries, heading to work, living lives that would never intersect with what had happened that morning. Or maybe they would. Eventually. Angela rested her hand lightly against the glass. The city stretched out in front of her, familiar and distant all at once. She had spent years in places like the one she had just left. Years watching patterns repeat, mistakes buried, voices ignored, systems protecting themselves. But something about today felt different. Not because of what happened, but because of how quickly it had happened. 60 seconds, that's all it had taken. Angela's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in clarity. She turned back toward the table, her gaze settling on the closed folder resting beside the laptop. Leather, worn at the edges. Important. She picked it up slowly, opening it just enough to glance at the document inside. Official, signed, undeniable. Then she closed it again, carefully, like it wasn't time yet. Across the city, inside a building that still believed it was untouchable, people moved through their day without a second thought. Laughing, ignoring, forgetting. Angela Brooks set the folder back down and reached for her coat again. Because tomorrow, they wouldn't be able to forget. And when that moment came, every second from this morning would still be there, waiting. Angela didn't leave the apartment right away. The city outside moved forward, but inside time slowed, thick, deliberate, like it was giving her space to remember. She stood by the window for a long moment, watching a bus pull up at the corner. The doors folded open with a tired sigh. People stepped on and off without looking at each other. No one asked questions. No one lingered. She had seen that before. People learning how not to see. Angela's reflection in the glass stared back at her, layered over the street below. The faint mark on her cheek caught the light differently now. Less red, more shadow. It would fade. They always did. That wasn't the part that stayed. She turned away from the window and walked slowly into the living room. Her steps were quiet, almost careful, like she was moving through something fragile. On the wall above the couch hung a single framed photograph. Angela stopped in front of it. It was old, edges slightly worn, the glass scratched faintly across the corner. The picture showed a younger version of her, maybe 12 or 13, standing beside a woman with warm eyes and steady posture. Her mother. They were standing in front of a small church, sunlight cutting across their shoulders. Angela remembered that day clearly. It had been summer, hot enough to make the pavement shimmer. She had been complaining about the heat, about her shoes, about everything. Her mother had just smiled. "You don't get to choose how people look at you," she had said, adjusting Angela's collar. "But you do get to choose how you stand." Angela reached up now, brushing her fingers lightly against the frame. That was the first time she understood it, or at least, the first time she tried. She moved to the small shelf beneath the photo. A stack of books sat there. Criminal justice, community law, investigative procedure. Worn from use, pages marked with notes and folded corners. Angela picked one up, flipping it open without thinking. A page near the middle. Highlighted lines. Accountability is not about reaction. It is about structure. Systems do not change because of anger. They change because of evidence. She closed the book gently, set it back. Her life hadn't been built in moments like the one in that lobby. It had been built in all the ones before it. The times she wasn't believed. The times she had to prove something twice as hard for half the recognition. The times she stayed late, worked quietly, fixed problems no one else even saw. Angela walked into the kitchen and opened a drawer. Inside, neatly arranged, were folders, labeled, dated, organized. Cases, past work, years of it. She pulled one out at random and set it on the counter. Inside were photographs, reports, statements, different names, different places, same patterns. People in power making decisions no one questioned, until someone did. Angela flipped through the pages slowly. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. This wasn't new. What happened this morning? It wasn't an exception. It was confirmation. She closed the folder and slid it back into place. The drawer shut with a soft click. Across the room, her phone buzzed again. Angela glanced at it but didn't pick it up immediately. She let it ring once, twice, then she walked over and lifted it. Another message. Everything is in motion. No name, no explanation. She didn't respond. Didn't need to. Instead, she set the phone down and moved toward the coat hanging by the door. Her fingers brushed over the fabric, pausing at the small pin again. This time she removed it carefully, held it in her hand for a second. It was simple, just a small piece of metal, shaped with clean lines, nothing flashy or obvious. But there was weight to it, meaning. Angela placed it on the table beside the leather folder. Not hidden, not displayed, just there, waiting. She stepped back slightly, taking in the room again. Everything in order, everything where it belonged. But something had shifted. Not outside. Not in the city. Inside. The same way it had shifted in that lobby. The same way it had shifted in Tanya's chest without her understanding why. Because sometimes change didn't arrive loud. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in the form of someone who refused to bend. Angela reached for her keys again. This time she didn't hesitate. The hallway outside was dim, the overhead light flickering slightly as she stepped out and locked the door behind her. The metal railing on the stairwell was cold under her hand as she made her way down. Outside, the air felt different now, not colder, clearer. The kind of air that came right before something broke open. Angela crossed the parking lot again, her steps steady, unhurried. She didn't look back at the building behind her. Didn't need to, because she already knew. What happened that morning wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. And somewhere inside Ridgeline Precinct, the people who laughed, the people who stayed silent, the people who turned away, were all standing on something they didn't realize was about to give way beneath them. They just hadn't felt the crack yet. By late afternoon, the precinct had settled into its usual rhythm again. Phones rang, doors opened and closed. Paperwork stacked higher on desks that were already too full. The day wore on the way it always did, steady, predictable, safe in the illusion that nothing truly changed inside those walls. But small things had begun to shift. Quiet things. The kind most people didn't notice. In the records office, a printer jammed twice in a row, forcing a clerk to step away and clear it manually. As she did, a stack of unsigned incident reports slipped from the tray and scattered across the floor. She bent to pick them up, flipping through each one quickly. None of them mentioned the lobby. Not a single line. She paused for a second longer than necessary, then stacked them neatly again and returned them to the tray. Business as usual. Down the hall, Tanya Reed sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen without really seeing it. The report she had started an hour ago remained unfinished, the cursor blinking at the end of a sentence that never quite came together. Her mind wasn't on the paperwork. It was on the woman, Angela Brooks. Even the name felt steady. Tanya leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temple lightly. She could still see it. The way Angela had stood there, the way she had spoken, the way she hadn't raised her voice. But it wasn't just that. It was the moment right before she left. Something small, something easy to miss. Tanya sat up a little straighter. The badge number. Angela hadn't looked down. She hadn't leaned in. She had just said it, like she already knew. Tanya's fingers hovered over her keyboard. Then slowly, she opened a new window and typed in the number she remembered hearing. Ryan Cole's badge number. It pulled up instantly. Name, rank, service record. Nothing unusual on the surface. But that wasn't what Tanya was looking for. She leaned back again, her eyes narrowing slightly. "How did you know that?" she murmured under her breath. Across the room, Jensen shifted in his seat, glancing over at Ryan, who was laughing with another officer near the lockers. The sound carried easily, filling the space with that same careless confidence. Jensen's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked away. Something about the morning had stuck with him too. Not the confrontation, not even the moment itself, but what came after, the silence. The way it had stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable, before anyone dared to move again. He rubbed the back of his neck, glancing toward the hallway. For a second, he almost stood up. Almost said something. But then Ryan's voice cut through the room again, loud and familiar. "Hey, you coming or what?" Jensen hesitated, then pushed his chair back and followed. "Because that's what you did. You followed." Outside, the sky had darkened slightly. clouds rolling in low and heavy. The wind picked up, rattling loose signs along the street. At the bus shelter, Denise Harper sat with her coat pulled tight around her, her phone still in her hands. She had watched the video more times than she could count, each time noticing something new. The angle of the camera caught just enough detail. Ryan's face, the movement of his arm, the way Angela reacted. Or didn't. Denise paused the video again, zoomed in slightly, her eyes narrowed. There. The moment before everything changed. Angela's gaze. It wasn't just calm. It was focused, measured, like she was taking something in. Denise leaned closer, studying the screen. Then she saw it. The slight tilt of Angela's head. The way her eyes flicked. Not randomly, not nervously, but directly to the badge. Once, quick, enough. Denise sat back slowly. That wasn't luck, she whispered. Across the street, the precinct loomed under the dimming sky, its windows reflecting the shifting light. Inside, people moved like they always did, unaware, unbothered. But Denise felt it now, the same thing Tanya had felt, the same thing Angela had already understood. This wasn't over, not even close. Back in the precinct, the hallway outside the captain's office remained quiet. The door was still slightly open, the empty chair inside waiting for someone who hadn't arrived yet. Or maybe had already been there. A faint draft slipped through the crack, stirring the papers on the desk just enough to shift their edges, unnoticed, but not unchanged. And somewhere between the silence in that room and the noise filling the rest of the building, the truth had already begun to take shape, piece by piece, detail by detail, until it would become something no one inside could ignore. They just didn't know it yet. The email arrived at 6:03 a.m. Most of them saw it on their phones before they even stepped into the building. A simple subject line, no explanation, no greeting, mandatory all-staff meeting, 0800 hours, no exceptions. Ryan Cole glanced at it while standing in front of his bathroom mirror, toothbrush still in his mouth. He squinted at the screen, then shrugged. Probably another policy update, he muttered to himself. He tossed the phone onto the counter and went back to brushing like it didn't matter. Because in his world, things like that never did. At the precinct, the mood felt different before anyone even said a word. The parking lot filled earlier than usual. Cars pulled in fast, engines cutting off quicker than normal. Doors shut harder. Conversations started mid-sentence and ended just as abruptly. Something was off, but no one could quite name it. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed as always, but the sound seemed sharper now, louder in the silence between conversations. Carol was already at her desk, her hands resting still on the keyboard. She hadn't started typing yet. The email sat open on her screen, the bold letters staring back at her. Mandatory. No exceptions. She had seen notices like that before, but never from the mayor's office. She glanced toward the hallway, then quickly back to her screen. Didn't say anything, didn't ask, because asking questions in a place like this only made things worse. By 7:55, the briefing room was full. Chairs scraped against the floor as officers took their seats, filling the space with restless energy. Conversations buzzed in low tones, overlapping, uncertain. Ryan dropped into his usual spot near the center, leaning back like he owned the place. Jensen sat beside him, quieter than usual, his eyes scanning the room. "You hear anything?" Jensen asked. Ryan shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Whatever it is, it'll be over in 10 minutes. He crossed his arms, settling in. Confident. Unbothered. Across the room, Tanya Reed took a seat near the wall. She didn't speak, didn't join this conversation. Her eyes stayed fixed on the door at the front of the room. Waiting. She didn't know what for. But she felt it again. That shift. Stronger now, like the air had changed pressure, like something was about to break. At exactly 8 o'clock, the door opened. The room quieted slowly, conversations fading one by one until all that remained was the low hum of the lights overhead. Mayor Evelyn Carter stepped inside. 2 aides followed behind her, carrying folders and tablets. She didn't smile, didn't greet anyone, just walked straight to the front of the room and placed her folder on the podium. That alone was enough to change the mood. This wasn't routine. This wasn't small. Ryan sat up slightly, his expression tightening just a fraction. "That's new," he muttered under his breath. Jensen didn't respond. Mayor Carter looked out over the room, her gaze steady, measured. She took her time before speaking, letting the silence settle fully. "Thank you for being here," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled, the kind of voice that didn't need to raise itself to be heard. "This department has been without permanent leadership for 3 months," she continued. "As of today, that changes." A ripple moved through the room. Small, subtle. But there, Ryan leaned forward slightly now, his attention sharpening. "After a national search," the mayor said, "we have selected a new precinct commander, someone with extensive experience in internal affairs, community policing, and departmental reform." The word reform landed heavier than the rest. Tanya's fingers tightened slightly in her lap. Across the room, Jensen shifted in his seat. Ryan's jaw set. Mayor Carter paused, her eyes scanning the room once more. Then she stepped slightly to the side. "Please welcome Commander Angela Brooks." The door opened again. But this time, everything changed. The woman who stepped inside wasn't the one they had seen the morning before. Not the quiet figure in a gray coat. Not the woman standing alone in the lobby. This was someone else. Angela Brooks walked into the room in full uniform, pressed, sharp. The fabric sat perfectly against her shoulders. The badge on her chest caught the light as she moved, reflecting it in small flashes that drew the eye without asking for attention. Her posture was straight, her expression calm, unshaken. She carried the same quiet presence she had in the lobby, but now it filled the room. Every step echoed, measured, unhurried, intentional. She walked down the center aisle past rows of officers who had gone completely still. No whispers, no movement, just silence. Ryan saw her first. At first it didn't register. His eyes tracked her movement automatically, his brain processing the image without context. Then it hit. All at once, his body reacted before his mind caught up. His shoulders stiffened. His hands gripped the edges of his chair. His breath caught. "That's," he started, but the words didn't come out. Jensen turned, following his gaze. And then he saw her too. The color drained from his face. Tanya didn't move, didn't react outwardly, but her eyes widened just slightly. Recognition, confirmation. The feeling she hadn't been able to name finally took shape. Angela reached the front of the room. She stopped beside the podium, giving a small nod to the mayor. Then she turned, faced them all, 60 people, all watching, all silent. The same room that had been filled with noise just minutes before now felt like it was holding its breath. Angela didn't smile, didn't rush, didn't look at Ryan. She didn't have to. She spoke clearly. "I'm not here to make this comfortable," she said, her voice carried without effort. "I'm here because this department has lost the trust of the people it serves." The words landed, heavy, direct, no room to hide behind them. "And I've already seen," she continued, "how some of you behave when you think no one important is watching." A ripple moved through the room again. Stronger this time. Ryan's chest tightened. His mind raced, trying to catch up, trying to understand how, when, but there was no space for it. No time. Because the moment had already passed. Angela stood there, steady and unshaken, and for the first time since the morning before, the power in the room had shifted, completely, irreversibly, and everyone felt it. The silence didn't break. It stretched, thick, uncomfortable, like the room itself didn't know how to move forward anymore. Angela Brooks stood at the front, steady, composed, her presence filling the space in a way that didn't demand attention, but held it completely. No one shifted. No one spoke. Even the air felt different now, heavier, like it had weight. Ryan Cole couldn't take his eyes off her. His mind kept trying to rewrite what he was seeing. This was the same woman, the same face, the same eyes, but everything else had changed. Or maybe nothing had changed at all. Maybe he had just never seen it clearly. His throat tightened. He swallowed hard. Next to him, Jensen leaned forward slightly, his hands pressed together like he was trying to steady himself. "That's her," Jensen whispered under his breath. Ryan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Across the room, Tanya Reed sat still, her back straight, her gaze locked on Angela. There was no surprise left in her expression now. Only clarity, only something close to relief. Because she had been right. Angela hadn't walked away. She had stepped back. Angela let the silence do its work for a few seconds longer. Then she continued. "Starting today," she said, her voice even, measured, "every interaction that happens in this building will reflect the standard of this badge." She tapped lightly against the badge on her chest. Not forceful, just enough. "I expect professionalism, I expect accountability, and I expect it immediately." Her eyes moved across the room. Not searching, not accusing, just seeing. Every face, every reaction, every attempt to look anywhere but at her. Ryan shifted in his seat. For the first time, he felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not anger, not annoyance, something colder, uncertainty. Angela's gaze passed over him without pause, like she didn't need to stop, like she already knew. That was worse, much worse, because it meant he didn't get to control the moment, didn't get to respond, didn't get to explain. He was just there, seen. Angela stepped back slightly, giving a small nod to Mayor Carter. The mayor returned it, then stepped forward again. "That's all for now," she said. "You'll receive further instructions by end of day." Her tone left no room for questions. The meeting was over, but no one moved, not right away, because something had shifted too deeply, too suddenly, and no one knew how to pretend it hadn't. Finally, chairs scraped, people stood, conversations started, but quieter this time, controlled, measured, different. Ryan remained seated for a second longer, his hands still gripping the armrests, his mind racing now, faster than before. She knows. The thought hit him hard. She knows exactly what happened. He stood abruptly, the legs of his chair scraping louder than intended. Jensen flinched slightly. "We need to talk," Ryan muttered. Jensen nodded immediately. They moved toward the exit quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone else, avoiding her. In the hallway, the noise returned. but it wasn't the same. Voices were lower, shorter. People spoke in pieces, glancing around like they were being watched. Because now, they were. Ryan grabbed Jensen's arm, pulling him toward a quieter corner near the lockers. "That was her," he said, his voice tight. "From yesterday." "I know," Jensen replied, his tone unsteady. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, pacing once, then again. Does she?" he started, then stopped. Jensen didn't answer right away. Didn't need to. They both knew. "She was right there," Jensen said finally. "She saw everything." Ryan's jaw tightened. His mind replayed the moment, the lobby, the words, the silence. And then her face. Calm, unshaken, like she had already decided something. Ryan stopped pacing. "What do we do?" Jensen asked. Ryan didn't answer immediately, because for the first time in a long time, he didn't have one. Down the hall, Tanya Reed stepped out of the briefing room last. She didn't rush, didn't look around. She just walked, past the lockers, past the front desk, past the same spot where everything had happened the morning before. She paused there, just for a second. Her eyes moved across the space, the floor, the counter, the door. Everything looked the same, but it wasn't. Because now, it meant something. She exhaled slowly and kept walking. Behind the glass, Carol watched her go, then glanced toward the hallway where Ryan and Jensen stood, their voices low but urgent. She couldn't hear what they were saying, but she didn't need to. She had seen enough. And now, so had everyone else. Back in the empty briefing room, Angela stood alone for a moment. The chairs were still slightly out of place. The air still held the weight of what had just happened. She set her leather portfolio down on the table and opened it. Inside were the same documents, the same notes, the same photographs. She placed her hand lightly on top of them, not to hide them, not to protect them, just to acknowledge what they represented. Then she closed the folder, because this wasn't about one moment. It never was. It was about everything that came after. And outside that room, everything had already begun to change. The shift wasn't loud. There were no alarms, no sudden confrontations. No one stood in the hallway pointing fingers or raising their voice. But something had settled into the building, something heavier than before. It showed in the way people moved, slower, more aware, like every step might be watched now. Ryan Cole felt it the moment he stepped back onto the floor. The same hallway he had walked 100 times suddenly felt narrower. The same walls seemed closer. The same sounds, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, felt sharper, like they carried meaning now. He didn't like it, didn't understand it. And worst of all, he couldn't ignore it. He walked toward his desk, forcing his posture to stay relaxed, his expression neutral. Around him, conversations dropped a little quieter when he passed. Not obvious, not direct, but enough. Enough to notice. Jensen followed a few steps behind, his usual easy confidence gone. He sat down without saying a word, staring at the screen in front of him like he was waiting for it to tell him what to do next. Ryan leaned on the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. "She didn't say anything," he muttered. Jensen looked up. "What?" "In there," Ryan said, his voice lower now. "She didn't bring it up." Jensen hesitated. "No, she didn't." Ryan nodded slowly, like that confirmed something in his mind. "That means something," he said. Jensen frowned slightly. "Or it means she's waiting." Ryan didn't respond right away, because that possibility, that was worse. much worse. Across the room, Tanya Reid sat at her desk, reviewing a report she had already read twice. The words blurred together, not because they were complicated, but because her focus wasn't on them. It was on the room, the people, the silence between conversations. She noticed things now that she hadn't before. How quickly people corrected their tone, how often they glanced toward the hallway, how even Ryan, who had always filled space with his presence, seemed just slightly off balance. Tanya leaned back in her chair, watching, not judging, just observing, because something had changed. Not completely, not yet, but enough to make the cracks visible. At the front desk, Carol finally began typing. The sound of the keyboard was soft but steady, filling the quiet space behind the glass. Her fingers moved carefully, each keystroke deliberate. She opened a new report. The blank form stared back at her. For a long moment, she didn't type anything. Then, she entered the date, paused, entered the time, paused again. Her eyes flicked toward the lobby, the same floor, the same counter, the same place where everything had happened. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then slowly, she started to write. Not everything, not yet, but something. And that was new. Down the hall, the captain's office door closed with a quiet click. Angela Brooks stood inside alone. The room was simple, clean, unused for too long. The desk sat at the center, papers neatly stacked but untouched. The chair behind it waited. She didn't sit right away. Instead, she walked the perimeter of the room slowly, taking in every detail. The placement of the furniture, the view from the window, the faint layer of dust on the bookshelf. Nothing out of place, but nothing fully alive either. A room waiting to be claimed. Angela moved to the desk and set her leather portfolio down on its surface. She opened it, revealing the contents inside. The notes, the photographs, the documentation from the morning before. Everything laid out in precise order. She didn't touch them yet, just looked, because this wasn't about reaction. It never had been. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the desk, her reflection faint in the polished surface. The mark on her cheek had faded slightly, barely noticeable now. But she knew it was there, and more importantly, she knew what it represented. A test, one she hadn't announced, one she hadn't explained, and one they had failed in less than a minute. Angela closed the portfolio gently. Then she sat down. The chair shifted under her weight, settling into place like it had been waiting for her, specifically. She reached for the phone on the desk, paused, then dialed. It rang once, twice, then connected. "This is Brooks," she said. Her voice was calm, steady. "I'm ready to proceed." She listened for a moment, her expression unchanged. "Yes," she continued. "All of it." Another pause, then, "No delays." She hung up, set the receiver back in place, and leaned back slightly in the chair. Outside her office, the building moved on. People worked, talked, watched. But now, every action carried weight. Every silence carried meaning. Because the difference between before and now wasn't what had been said. It was what hadn't. Angela hadn't called anyone out, hadn't raised her voice, hadn't pointed fingers. She had simply arrived. And that alone had changed everything. Ryan sat at his desk, staring at the screen in front of him. He tried to focus, tried to push the thoughts aside, but they kept coming back. Her voice, her presence, that look, and the one thing he couldn't shake. She hadn't needed to say anything. Because somehow, that made it worse. Much worse. Because now he didn't know when it was coming, or how far it would go. And for the first time in a long time, Ryan Cole realized something he had never had to consider before. He wasn't in control anymore. The realization didn't hit all at once. It crept in, slow, persistent, like a crack spreading through glass. Quiet at first, almost invisible, until suddenly it was everywhere. By mid-afternoon, the precinct felt different again. Not just tense, structured, deliberate. Requests came through channels they hadn't used in months. Files that had sat untouched were suddenly pulled from drawers. Emails marked urgent appeared in inboxes that rarely saw them. And then, the first call came in. Internal affairs. Not from inside the building, from outside. That alone was enough to make people stop what they were doing. Jensen was the one who heard it first. He stood near the copier, flipping through a stack of papers when his phone buzzed. He glanced down, expecting something routine. It wasn't. His face shifted slightly. "Ryan," he said quietly. Ryan didn't look up right away. He was sitting at his desk, pretending to focus, though his screen hadn't changed in over 10 minutes. "What?" he muttered. Jensen stepped closer. "They're asking for statements." That got his attention. Ryan looked up slowly. "What kind of statements?" Jensen swallowed. "About yesterday." The room seemed to quiet just a little. Not enough for anyone to notice directly, but enough for everyone to feel. Ryan leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly through his nose. "Routine," he said. "Probably just checking boxes." But his voice didn't carry the same certainty it had that morning. Jensen didn't respond, because they both knew. This wasn't routine. Across the room, Tanya Reed watched the exchange from her desk. She didn't need to hear the words to understand what was happening. She had been waiting for this. Not for revenge, not for confrontation, just for movement. And now it had started. Her phone buzzed next. She looked down, a message from an unknown number. "Please report to interview room B1430. Tanya stared at the screen for a moment, then stood up. Her legs felt steady, more steady than they had in a long time. As she walked down the hallway, the sounds of the precinct faded behind her. Each step echoed softly, the weight of it different now. Not heavy, grounded, like she was finally walking towards something instead of away from it. The interview room was small, plain, a table, 2 chairs, a camera mounted in the corner. Nothing personal, nothing comfortable, just truth, or the space where truth was supposed to happen. A man sat inside, flipping through a file as she entered. Older, calm, eyes sharp but not unkind. He looked up as she stepped in. "Officer Reed," he said, "thank you for coming." Tanya nodded, closing the door behind her. She sat down across from him, hands resting lightly in her lap. Still, composed. "Let's keep this simple," he said. "We're reviewing an incident that occurred in the lobby yesterday morning." Tanya didn't speak. He slid a tablet across the table. "Take a look," he said. She already knew what it was, but she watched anyway. The footage played. The angle wasn't perfect. The audio was faint. But it was enough. The moment, the movement, the silence after. Tanya's expression didn't change, but her breathing did, just slightly. "Were you present?" the investigator asked. "Yes," she said. "Did you intervene?" A pause. Not long, but enough. "No." The word landed quietly, but it carried weight. "Why not?" he asked. Tanya looked down at her hands, then back up. "Because this time, She wasn't going to look away. "Because that's how it works here," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "People don't step in. They don't speak up. Not if they want to keep their jobs." The investigator didn't interrupt, didn't react. He just listened. Tanya leaned forward slightly. "And that's the problem," she continued. "Not just what happened yesterday, but everything that happened before it." The room stayed quiet, but something inside it had shifted. The truth didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be said. Back in the main office, Ryan sat frozen in his chair. His phone lay on the desk in front of him. Another message, same request, same room, same time. He hadn't opened it yet. Didn't need to. He already knew. Jensen stood a few feet away, pacing slowly. "They've got something," Jensen said under his breath. Ryan didn't respond, because now he was starting to understand. It wasn't just about what happened. It was about what could be proven. And somewhere, someone had made sure it could be. Across town, Denise Harper sat at her kitchen table, her phone plugged into the wall, the video file open again. But this time, she wasn't watching it. She was sending it. One copy, then another, making sure it didn't disappear, making sure it didn't get lost. Because for the first time, she believed it might matter. Back in her office, Angela Brooks stood by the window, looking out over the city. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows across the streets below. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, calm, steady, unchanged. Behind her, the leather portfolio sat open on the desk. Empty now, because everything inside it had already been set in motion. Angela didn't smile, didn't celebrate. She just stood there, watching. Because this wasn't the end, not even close. It was the moment where everything began to surface. And once it did, there would be no putting it back. Not this time. 9 days later, the building looked the same. The same cracked tiles, the same humming lights, the same chairs lined up along the wall. But nothing inside it felt familiar anymore. People spoke differently now. Quieter, more careful. Like every word might carry further than it used to. Like every action might stay longer than they expected. Because now, they knew someone was watching. Not just from the front of the room, but from inside the system itself. The hearing room on the second floor was small, windowless, and cold. A long table stretched across the center, papers laid out in neat stacks. Chairs lined both sides, filled with people who didn't speak unless they had to. Angela Brooks sat at the head of the table. Not as the woman from the lobby, not as the one who had walked out silently, but as the one who had come back and stayed. Her uniform was pressed, her posture steady, her expression unchanged. She didn't look at Ryan when he walked in, but she felt it, the shift in the room, the weight of his presence now, smaller, contained. Ryan Cole took his seat slowly. For the first time in years, he didn't lean back, didn't stretch out, didn't fill the space around him. He sat still, hands resting on the table, eyes forward, but not steady. The investigator spoke first, clear, direct. No emotion in his voice. The findings were read aloud. Not dramatically, not loudly. Just fact after fact. The footage, the witness statements, the absence of a report. The pattern that had been there long before that morning. Each piece placed carefully on the table, one after another, until there was nothing left to deny. Ryan's attorney spoke. Words like misjudgment, stress, context, but they didn't carry, they didn't land, because the room had already seen enough. Angela listened, didn't interrupt, didn't react. She let every word pass through the room before she spoke. When she did, her voice was calm, steady, final. "Officer Cole," she said, "based on the findings presented, your conduct does not meet the standard required of this department." No anger, no raised tone, just truth. "You are terminated, effective immediately." The words settled into the room. Not heavy, not loud, but absolute. Ryan didn't move right away, didn't argue, didn't protest, because for the first time, he understood, not just what had happened, but what it meant. Slowly, he reached up and removed his badge, the same badge he had carried with confidence, the same badge he thought gave him control. He placed it on the table. The sound was quiet, but it echoed. Then he stood, turned, and walked out. No one stopped him. No one followed. The door closed behind him with a soft click. And just like that, it was over. But not everything ended there. Jensen sat in the same room not long after. His posture was different, his voice quieter. When asked why he hadn't intervened, he didn't look away. "I should have," he said, simple, honest, late, but real. His outcome wasn't the same. Suspension, mandatory retraining, a second chance, but one that came with weight, the kind that didn't disappear. Tanya Reed stood in that room as well, but not as someone being questioned, as someone being heard. She spoke clearly, not rushed, not hesitant. 6 years of silence broken in a single conversation. Not loud, but enough. Enough to matter. Outside the room, Denise Harper stood in the hallway, holding her phone in both hands. The same phone she had almost put away. The same phone that now held something that changed everything. She didn't need to say anything. She already had. Weeks passed, then months. The building didn't transform overnight. It didn't become perfect. It didn't forget what it had been. But it changed. Slowly, deliberately. There were new procedures, new oversight, new expectations. But more than that, there was a different kind of silence. Not the silence of fear, but the silence of awareness. People noticed things now. They spoke up more, even if it was just a little, even if it was just enough. Tanya stood in the same hallway one afternoon, watching a young officer kneel down to help a child who had walked in holding his mother's hand. It was a small moment, easy to miss, but it mattered, because it hadn't always been like that. Angela Brooks walked through the front entrance later that evening. The same door, the same floor, the same space where everything had begun. She paused for a moment. Not long, just enough. Her eyes moved across the lobby, the desk, the chairs, the place where she had stood, where no one had spoken, where no one had moved. She didn't feel anger, didn't feel triumph, just something quieter, something steady, proof that what happened there didn't stay there. She turned and walked forward, past the desk, past the silence that used to live there, into something different, something better. Not perfect, but real. And somewhere in that building, in every quiet correction, every moment someone chose to speak, every second someone decided not to look away, the truth remained, unchanged, clear, and impossible to ignore. Because dignity was never something that could be taken, only something people chose not to see, until they finally did. And when they did, everything changed. Have you ever stayed silent when you knew something wasn't right, and wished later that you hadn't? Angela Brooks stood in that same lobby where no one spoke for her. and without raising her voice once, she made an entire room finally listen. What this story shows is that silence doesn't protect you. It protects the problem. And sometimes, it only takes one person choosing truth over comfort to break something that's been wrong for years. So next time you see something that doesn't sit right, don't wait for someone else to step in. Speak up, even if it's small, because Angela didn't change that room with power. She changed it by refusing to look away. If this story hit you, comment 1 below and tell me, have you ever witnessed something and wished you had the courage to say something? There's another story coming up, one that might make you see silence in a very different way.